It won't budge at all? Xianxia's pupils constricted behind his mask. Meanwhile, he sensed a few white-robed old men were charging towards him from afar. Obviously, they knew what his intentions were. What should I do? Leave. But how could he be willing to leave just like that? Moreover, if he left now, then it would undoubtedly be beyond difficult to try and rescue the sword spirit's main body again. So, he couldn't let this opportunity slip by. Yang Yi waved his right hand, and then Guardian Lin and 10 other half-saint sword servants appeared before him and engaged the white-robed half-saints in battle. Half-saint puppets! Who exactly are you? The old man's shocked and furious voice resounded, and then numerous explosions resounded from behind Yang Yi. Yang Ye's gaze descended onto the seal that floated above the sword, and a wisp of ferocity flashed through his eyes as he swung Lunar Reverie at it. Bang! A muffled explosion resounded. The seal trembled violently, but Lunar Reverie trembled even more violently in Yang Ye's grasp. Moreover, Yang Yi was shocked to notice that cracks had even appeared on Lunar Reverie. How dare you? That sword is the key to sealing the Defiant Profounders. All the Defiant Profounders will cease to be restrained if you destroy that. Do you know what the consequences of that would be? The white-robed old man who led the group of experts against Yang Ye's sword servants roared with fury. Yang Yi paid no attention to the old man. As he gazed once more at the seal, he didn't dare underestimate it at all. He flipped his palm, and he exchanged Lunar Reverie for the Herculean hammer. He took it in both hands, and then he smashed it down towards the seal. This time he didn't hold back at all, and he even utilized the Herculean armor's boost in strength. So, the strength of this strike tore space apart. Bang! The Herculean hammer struck the seal again, and both the hammer and the seal trembled violently. Meanwhile, Yang Yi raised the hammer and struck down once more. Bang! A huge explosion resounded as the seal exploded apart before the eyes of everyone. Don't you dare! The old man's eyes almost split apart from rage, and they were completely crimson red. He seemed to be filled with madness and astonishment. Yang Yi paid no attention to that. He grabbed the sword's hilt with his right hand. This time, it didn't take him much effort to pull the sword out. However, a strand of emotions that carried unwillingness, resentment, and madness surged into his mind at the moment he pulled it out, causing his face to instantly turn savage. Those emotions filled his mind, causing him to only have a single thought left, and it was to kill everything before him. Fortunately, it didn't take long for Yang Ye's mind to regain clarity, and then he gazed at the sword with shock. He hadn't expected that it could actually throw his mind into disorder. After all, he possessed the enlightened sword heart, and he'd even comprehended second-level heaven-rank sword intent. Yang Yi didn't dare hold the sword for a moment longer, because the negative emotions within it hadn't reduced at all, and it was even surging incessantly towards him like a torrent. Yang Yi issued a command in his heart, and the ancient sheath appeared before him. He sheathed the sword within the ancient sheath before he turned around, waved his hand, and placed the sword servants back into the primordial pagoda. After that, he stomped his right foot against the top of the pagoda, and he transformed into a ray of light which shot towards the exit. Stop him! Stop him! The white-robed old man roared hysterically with rage. However, right when Yang Yi left the top of the pagoda, the entire pagoda of confinement suddenly started trembling violently. The white-robed old man was horrified, and he hurriedly shouted, "Everyone get back here and guard the pagoda! Disregard him!" When they saw the pagoda of confinement trembling violently and seeming to be on the verge of splitting apart, all the other white-robed experts were horrified, and they couldn't be bothered to stop the other Defiant Profounders. All of them charged towards the pagoda. Meanwhile, the Defiant Profounders didn't stay for a moment longer. All of them shot into the air and charged towards the exit, because all of them were very clearly aware that a huge amount of reinforcements was definitely on the way, and only death would be awaiting them if they stayed a moment longer. Right when Yang Yi was about to charge out, an enormous being appeared at the exit. It was completely pitch black, had the head of a lion, the horns of a deer, the eyes of a tiger, the scales of a dragon, and the tail of a dragon. At this moment, It was staring fixedly at Yang Yi with a cold and vicious gaze, and it caused Yang Yi to feel extremely uncomfortable. A Qilin of legend. Yang Yi was shocked. He hadn't expected that he would see a legendary Qilin here. But aren't Qilins auspicious beasts? That's clearly not an auspicious beast. If it were, then it would absolutely not emanate such a cold and vicious aura. It's like the convergence of the evil throughout the world. The black Qilin opened its enormous mouth, and it seemed like it intended to bite Yang Yi. However, a voice suddenly resounded from its back. "Blackie, we have important matters to attend to." Yang Yi looked over towards the source of the voice, and he saw a man standing on the Qilin's back. He wore a dark golden robe, and the robe was covered in all sorts of strange symbols. The symbols seemed as if they were alive, and they were actually moving slowly. As for the man's appearance, he was extremely handsome with angular features that seemed as if they were carved by a blade. Besides that, there was a broad ink-black sword hanging from his waist while he held a scroll that had strange symbols inscribed on it. At this moment, his handsome face had a carefree grin on it, and he emanated a refined yet vicious aura. Yang Ye's gaze focused on the man. The man grinned as a palm-sized talisman appeared before him. He said, "If I activate this talisman, then this exit will be immediately sealed. Trust me, you won't be able to escape even if you're at the half-saint realm." Yang Yi filled his palm, and the stone of suppression appeared in his grasp. At the same time, his second-level heaven-rank sword intent surged out madly and pressed down like a million mountains from above the man and the Qilin. Moreover, strands of dazzling light surged out, and less than a breath of time passed before 10,000 swords formed an enormous ball that enveloped all three of them. "I'll die if I can't escape. Do you think I'll be able to drag you down with me before that happens?" Yang Yi gazed at the man as he spoke. The man sized up the surroundings, yet there wasn't a trace of panic on his face. He just revealed a trace of surprise before he gazed at Yang Yi and said, "Around the age of 20. Peak second-level heaven-rank sword intent and the enlightened sword heart. TSK. How extraordinary. Besides those freaks of the Nether Pavilion, this world was actually capable of producing a genius like you. However, if you intend to rely on all of this to drag me down with you, then I'm afraid it isn't sufficient." Yang Yi waved his right hand, and then 11 half-saint puppets appeared around him as he said, "What about now?" The man gazed at Yang Yi for a short while before he said, "You can leave. Let's spar if we have the chance." "As you wish." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi issued a command in his heart, and the swords and half-saints returned into the primordial pagoda. After that, his figure flashed and transformed into a ray of light that charged out from the exit. As soon as Yang Yi left, the talisman that floated before the man exploded apart, and then a translucent barrier of light appeared at the exit. The defiant profounders charged over to the exit as well, but not a single one of them could break through it. Meanwhile, rays of light flashed from the teleportation platforms below, and then half-saints appeared in succession. In next to no time, over 100 half-saints had appeared here, and a battle erupted. "Grandmaster Xianxia, please lend us a hand." A white-robed old man appeared before the man who stood on the Qilin, and his voice and face were filled with anxiousness, because the pagoda of confinement seemed as if it would collapse at any moment. As he gazed at the pagoda down below, the man who was called Xianxia had a trace of a heavy expression in his eyes. He said, "All of you can't come out right now." As soon as he spoke, the black Qilin brought him to the top of the pagoda. Xianxia drew the sword on his waist and pointed it up towards the sky. "With the world as my talisman, with the sun and moon as my brush, and with the grand Tao as the catalyst. Heaven's seal. Form." As soon as he spoke, he swung the sword swiftly, and then a change suddenly occurred in the heavens and the earth in an area of 5,000 kilometers around him. Countless strands of mysterious energy descended from the sky and surged out from the ground before converging at the tip of his sword. The old man who stood by Xianxia's side was astounded, because he was able to sense that the spirit energy in an area of 5,000 kilometers was actually being completely extracted, and it was converging at the tip of the man's sword. In next to no time, an enormous talisman that was over 30 m long and 10 m wide appeared in the air. At the same time, Shun Mo's countenance turned slightly pale. Seal! He roared furiously as he pressed the sword down, and the enormous talisman descended like a mountain upon the pagoda. A strand of golden energy that carried the aura of the Grand Tao instantly stormed down, and then the trembling pagoda of confinement immediately fell silent. The old man heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this scene. Meanwhile, Shinemo said, "This seal is able to seal them for half a month at most because the energy within it will be exhausted by then. So, you have to constantly dispatch half-saints to transfer energy into this talisman. Only then would it be able to last for 2 months. Understood." The old man hurriedly nodded. Shinemo glanced at the pagoda and said, 2 months from now, life and death will be decided in battle. As soon as he finished speaking, he patted the Qilin on the head. The latter understood his intentions, and it roared before transforming into a ray of black light that vanished from where it stood. After Yang Yi left the exit, he fled madly all along the way. At this moment, Yang Ye's face was covered in excitement and joy. He'd obtained the sword precursor, and that meant that he could execute the true Heavenrend. Moreover, he could even grasp the true secrets of the sword domain. So, from today onwards he could kill half-saints like dogs. Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh madly when he thought up to this point. However, it wasn't long before he stopped fleeing, and the smile on his face had even froze, because the patriarch of the fire spirit race was standing before him. Moreover, 11 other half-saints were standing by his side as well. Chen Yen, Tong Fon, and the Grand Elder were amongst them. "Yang Yi, I thought that you'd never swing your sword again." The fire spirit race's patriarch spoke fiercely. "I immediately rushed over when I sensed your sword energy. The heavens reward those who wait. I finally found you. Today, I'll make you pay 1,000,000-fold for the destruction of my fire spirit race. So it was because of my sword intent." Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings, and he noticed to his astonishment that the ancient city of Hallows was actually just nearby. So the pagoda of confinement was just near the ancient city of Hallows. Not only did Yang Yi show no signs of fear as he gazed at the patriarch of the fire spirit race and the other 11 half-saints, he even revealed a trace of excitement. He said, "You old dog, I'll allow you to witness the true Heavenrend today." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi took the sword precursor's hilt in his right hand and pulled. "It isn't moving? I can't pull it out? What the fuck?" Yang Yi lowered his head to look at the sword he held, and he couldn't help but curse. He couldn't pull it out from the pagoda earlier because of the seal, but it didn't make sense for him to be unable to do so now. Yang Yi couldn't figure it out no matter how he racked his brains. On the other hand, the experts from the fire spirit race were stunned. They could be said to have been fully on guard when Yang Yi was about to draw his sword. Because while Yang Yi was only at the 4th rank of the monarch realm, they were clearly aware that he couldn't be judged by convention at all. But they never imagined that he would actually not draw his sword. "Yang Yi, are you trying to insult us?" Chen Yen gazed ferociously at Yang Yi and was about to attack. However, his eyelids twitched, and he stepped back once more because Yang Yi had grasped the hilt of his sword again and was trying to draw it once more. He still vividly remembered how powerful Yang Ye's sword technique was, so he didn't dare act carelessly in the slightest. This time, Yang Yi utilized his entire physical strength. The sword moved slightly, and it delighted Yang Yi. So, he continued using all his strength and it rose 0.5 centimeter. However, Yang Ye's expression changed drastically because the clothes that covered his right arm had shattered apart and burnt into ashes. Moreover, his entire right arm had cracked apart while blood sprayed out from within it. Yang Yi was horrified, and he hurriedly pushed the sword back into the sheath. He didn't doubt that his entire arm would shatter into bits if he were to continue drawing it. On the other hand, the experts of the fire spirit race were stunned. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Yang Ye's arm would have actually cracked apart while he tried to draw his sword. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly raised his head to glance at them, and he said, next time, I'll let all of you witness the true Heavenrend." Yang Yi immediately stomped his right foot against the ground, and then his figure transformed into a ray of light that shot towards the distance. Merely an instant passed before he vanished from their fields of vision. Get him! The experts of the fire spirit race immediately recovered from their shock when they saw Yang Yi flee, and they flashed off in pursuit of him. As he flew through the air, Yang Ye's brows knit tightly together as he gazed at the sheathed sword in his grasp. It shouldn't have been like that. How could I have been unable to draw it? Could it be the sword spirit? That isn't very likely, right? The sword spirit. Yang Ye's expression changed slightly when he thought of the sword spirit. Because logically speaking, the sword spirit should have recovered once he got the sword precursor. But she still hadn't shown herself until now. Moreover, he noticed that he was actually unable to contact her right now. What exactly happened to her? Suddenly, the patriarch of the fire spirit race appeared in front of him and interrupted his thoughts. Yang Yi, do you know how long I've been looking for you? He gazed at Yang Yi with a gloomy expression on his face. I've been utilizing my divine sense to search an area of a few tens of thousands of kilometers around the city every single day just to find you. Unfortunately, it was like you'd evaporated into thin air after that day. Fortunately, good things come to those who wait. I detected your sword intent today. I'll never forget the aura of your sword intent. He could be said to have committed sins against his race by allowing the fire spirit race to be destroyed. Moreover, after the fire spirit race was destroyed and they were forced to seek refuge from the hallowed halls, everything his race had encountered truly infuriated him, because all of it had been caused by Yang Yi, and that was why he searched for Yang Yi at all times. Yang Yi glanced towards the north. He couldn't see the ancient city of Hallows anymore. In other words, he was at least a few tens of thousands of kilometers away from the city. Yang Yi, you won't be able to escape this time. Chen Yan and the others had arrived as well. This time, the 11 half-saints in their group stood in various different directions to obstruct Yang Ye's paths of retreat. Who said anything about escaping? Yang Yi glanced at them and said, Since all of you intend to court death today, then how could I not fulfill your wishes? Yang Yi waved his right hand while he spoke, and 11 half-saints appeared here. Meanwhile, Yang Yi immediately withdrew the stone of suppression, and it instantly made their cultivations drop from the half-saint realm to the monarch realm. 11 half-saints. One is a mid-grade half-saint. How could this be possible? All of them gazed at this scene before them with disbelief. My God! 11 half-saints, and one of them is even a mid-grade half-saint. How could this be possible? How could this be possible? Leave! Everyone retreat and seek assistance from the hallowed halls. The patriarch of the fire spirit race was the first to recover from his shock. At this moment, he was very clearly aware that they were definitely incapable of killing these 11 half-saints while their cultivations were suppressed. So he hadn't hesitated to order a retreat. Unfortunately, Yang Yi refused to let that happen, and a golden barrier of light suddenly appeared around them. The golden barrier of light was a heaven-grade barrier created by the barrier flags he obtained from Manuan. Even though it consumed a very terrifying amount of extreme-grade energy stones, it would be worth it if he could kill all of these half-saints from the fire spirit race. Kill! As soon as Yang Yi spoke, the 11 sword servants charged madly towards the experts from the fire spirit race. Meanwhile, Yang Yi withdrew a heaven-rank sword and aimed it at one of the half-saints before executing his strongest attack. They were suppressed. From the moment the battle began, every single half-saint from the fire spirit race was completely suppressed. Their cultivations had been suppressed by the stone of suppression while Yang Ye's sword intent suppressed them further, so regardless of whether it was their speed or reaction time, it couldn't compare to Yang Yi and the half-saint sword servants. That was exactly why they immediately fell into an absolutely disadvantageous position when the battle began. Hiss! A ray of light flashed, and then the body of a half-saint from the fire spirit race stiffened on the spot. A fist-sized hole had appeared on his chest. As soon as that half-saint died, Yang Yi waved his right hand and immediately transported the corpse into the primordial pagoda. Next, both he and the half-saint sword servant who was fighting that expert charged towards the next half-saint from the fire spirit race. This time it was 3 against 1. 2 half-saint sword servants kept that expert busy, while Xianxia's sword pierced through that half-saint's chest with absolute ease. After that, it was 4 against 1. 5 against 1. In next to no time, only 3 remained. The Fire Spirit Race's patriarch, Chen Yan and Tong Fun. This time, 9 half-saint sword servants surrounded the patriarch of the Fire Spirit Race while the last 2 kept Chen Yan and Tong Fun busy. At this moment, their faces were filled with despair because the Fire Spirit Race had truly been annihilated this time. After all, once they were gone, then the remaining members of their race who resided in the ancient city of Hallows would be like sheep who were at the mercy of others. Once the defiant Profounders emerged from the seal, they would absolutely be unable to survive as there was no one left to protect them. The patriarch of the Fire Spirit Race was truly filled with despair and regret right now. If he had killed Chen Yan that day and let Xianxia live, then the Fire Spirit Race wouldn't have been destroyed, and he wouldn't have to die right now. After all, sacrificing Chen Yan alone could have given the Fire Spirit Race peace. Unfortunately, he'd chosen to kill Xianxia that day. Not to mention what happened in the past. If he hadn't come to pursue Xianxia today, then the remaining half-saints of the Fire Spirit Race wouldn't have been annihilated. At this moment, the patriarch of the Fire Spirit Race, Chen Yan, and Tong Feng were all covered in injuries, and they were bound to be defeated and killed. Xianxia gazed at Chen Yan and said, "Do you know why I've kept you alive until now? Because I felt that I would truly be letting off too easily if I were to just kill you. I'll make you pay a horrible and unforgettable price for killing Xiao Man." Xianxia couldn't help but surge with ferocious killing intent when he thought of Xiao Man. It was a scar that would stay with him forever. "Xianxia, you want me to beg you for mercy? Ha ha ha." Chen Yan roared like a madman. "Do you think that I would beg for mercy from you? Dream on. I only regret not risking everything to kill you that day and leaving such a calamity alive. But it's fine because you won't survive for long even if I die. The hallowed halls won't let you go. Ha ha ha. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. For rays of light flashed, and then a shrill cry resounded from Chen Yan as 4 swords nailed him on the ground. Xianxia flashed over to Chen Yan, stomped on Chen Yan's chest with his right foot, and said, "Didn't you intend to extract my soul and place it deep beneath the ground to be burned alive? Unfortunately, you couldn't do it. But it's fine because I'll allow you to experience it yourself." As he spoke, Xianxia pressed his hand against Chen Yan's head, and then a powerful suction force surged out from his palm. "Ah!" Chen Yan instantly let out a shrill cry. It wasn't long before Xianxia had extracted Chen Yan's soul by force. The pain from such an experience was simply impossible to describe with words, and it was to the extent that the face on Chen Yan's corpse had warped severely. Xianxia didn't waste his breath at all. He immediately tossed Chen Yan's soul to a sword servant, and that sword servant flashed into the ground and tunneled his way deep into the ground. "It's time to end this." Xianxia flipped his palm, and his sword emanated a dazzling glow as it shot towards the patriarch of the Fire Spirit Race who was persisting bitterly in battle. He was almost completely exhausted, so Xianxia's sword pierced through his chest without experiencing much difficulty. A mid-grade half-saint perished just like that. The patriarch of the Fire Spirit Race stared fixedly at Xianxia with a gaze that was filled with resentment, and it remained like that until the moment he took his last breath. Xianxia put the corpse away, and then he looked at Tong Fon and said, "You can leave." "Why?" asked Tong Fon in a low voice. "If Xiao Man was still alive, she would absolutely not want me to kill her grandfather. You should be grateful that you had a granddaughter." Xianxia glanced coldly at him before turning around and leaving. Tong Fon watched Xianxia leave, and he stood silently on the spot for a short while before he turned around and left. After traveling a certain distance, Xianxia suddenly stopped moving. Meanwhile, the ancient sheath in his grasp suddenly trembled violently before a ray of light flashed, and the sword spirit appeared in front of him. However, the sword spirit was slightly different than before. She wore a dark red dress and had an extremely cold expression on her face. Moreover, her eyes were filled with viciousness and killing intent. Xianxia frowned. Suddenly, the sword spirit pressed her fingers together to form a sword, and she pointed her fingers at Xianxia. In an instant, a myriad of strands of sword energy shot towards him. Xianxia's expression changed drastically. The sword energy was like a dense storm that had no gaps in between it at all. Moreover, the sword intent every single strand of sword energy carried was actually not weaker to Xianxia's second-level heaven rank sword intent. There were countless strands of sword energy, and they were both strong and extremely swift. Coupled with the fact that Xiangxia hadn't expected the sword spirit to attack him, so he was caught off guard and instantly enveloped by the sword energy. "You're so weak. How could you be worthy of being my master?" A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of the sword spirit's mouth as she gazed at Xianxia, who'd been enveloped by sword energy. And then she turned around with the intention of leaving. Bang! Suddenly, a huge explosion resounded as the sword energy exploded apart. The sword spirit's dark brows knit together slightly as she turned around to gaze at Xianxia. At this moment, Xianxia was covered by the Herculean armor. He wasn't able to dodge the sword energy in time earlier, so he had no choice but to instantly activate the Herculean armor. Fortunately, while the sword energy was powerful, it couldn't break through the Herculean armor's defenses. "You aren't the sword spirit." Xianxia flipped his palm and lunar reverie appeared in his grasp. Moreover, his sword intent surged out madly and enveloped down upon the sword spirit. However, Xianxia was horrified to notice that his sword intent couldn't move an inch closer after it arrived 3 m away from her. It was like something had stopped his sword intent. The sword spirit glanced at the Herculean armor which Xianxia wore and said, "So you relied on a treasure. You're nothing worth mentioning. I wonder what made her think highly of you and actually acknowledge you as her master. How truly laughable." As she spoke, the sword spirit suddenly opened her mouth and sucked, and then all the sword intent Xianxia had emanated were actually sucked into her mouth. Xianxia was astounded. Third-level heaven rank sword intent. She possesses third-level heaven rank sword intent? The sword spirit took a deep breath with a greedy expression on her face, and then she said, "Your sword intent isn't bad, but the laughable thing is you actually utilized sword intent before me. Do you not know that I'm immune to all sword intent and sword energy? Because I possess a pure sword physique, and it allows me to absorb all sword intent and sword energy." She's immune to sword intent. Xianxia's eyelids twitched. He took a deep breath as he exchanged lunar reverie for the Herculean hammer. And then he said, "I only have a single question. Are you the sword spirit or not?" "Of course." The woman in a red dress laughed coldly. "I understand what you mean. That sword spirit you knew in the past was me as well, but that was an incomplete form of me. Now our souls have merged together, and the one standing before you is the true sword spirit. Understand?" Xianxia gazed at her for a short while. In the end, he shook his head and said, "Just leave." A wisp of surprise flashed through her eyes as she said, "What? You intend to let me off now so that you can trap me later?" Xianxia was quite dispirited. Indeed, he'd experienced all sorts of difficulties, yet this was the outcome of it all. No one would feel happy upon encountering such a thing. Xianxia shrugged and said, "I would have definitely taken many wrong paths on my path towards the sword Tao if it wasn't for your help. Moreover, you even saved me from many dangerous situations in the past. In short, while I've saved you, it can only be considered as returning the favor." "You don't owe me anything," she said. "Do you realize that you won't be able to execute Heavenrend without me? Moreover, you won't be able to obtain the last 2 moves of the Triapex sword technique. What do you want now?" Xianxia was quite annoyed. "You aren't willing to stay by my side, so what's the point of saying all of that? Moreover, I don't think I can stop you if you intend to flee." He really couldn't stop her because her current strength was at the half-saint realm at least. Coupled with the fact that she was immune to sword intent and sword energy, he was completely helpless against her. She suddenly said, "I've changed my mind. What are you trying to say?" Xianxia frowned. She wasn't the same sword spirit that he knew. She was clearly not a nice person. She replied, "I need to constantly absorb sword intent to grow and improve myself. Ordinary sword intent and sword cultivators aren't able to satisfy my needs, yet you are barely qualified. However, I won't acknowledge you as my master. but we can work together. You should be aware that chaos is about to descend to the world, and it's beneficial for both of us to work together. What would I gain from that? Asked Xianxia. If it was the old sword spirit, then he would naturally not make a fuss about this. But he had to when facing this new sword spirit, because his intuition told him that she would scheme against him. I can guide you in your cultivation, the sword spirit replied. Moreover, you can learn the other two attacks from the tri-apex sword technique, and it's even to the extent that I can pass down other sword techniques which surpass it. I have one more condition, said Xianxia. What? Tell me how to use the sword domain, said Xianxia. The sword domain was the most important part, because only by truly grasping it would he have the ability to fight those experts that had cultivated for countless years. The sword spirit's eyes narrowed slightly as she gazed at Xianxia in silence. What? That's not a problem, right? Xianxia asked. Or even you don't know? I do, she said. But I won't tell you how. Not for now, at least. Why? Xianxia frowned. She replied coldly, no reason. The corners of Xiangxia's mouth twitched. At this moment, he really wanted to charge over and give her a slap, but he restrained himself in the end. He thought for a moment and said, my strength isn't very strong before some of the older half-saints, so I must grasp the true method of utilizing the sword domain. Only then would I be able to fight them. Since you know how, then tell me. After all, we've known each other for quite some time. All right? She answered, the sword domain you've grasped isn't the true sword domain. What do you mean? Asked Xianxia. She replied, I won't tell you the true secrets of the sword domain until I've completely recovered. Xianxia asked, it can pose a threat to you? She answered frankly, yes. Xianxia gazed at the sword spirit for a short while, and then he nodded and said, all right. So, according to what you said, my sword domain actually isn't a true sword domain. It's far from that, she replied. At the very most, it can be considered to possess the framework of a sword domain, but it doesn't have any material content within it. How formidable is the true sword domain? Xianxia continued. She looked up into the sky and then said, you're the heavens within it. So long as your opponent doesn't possess the strength to defy the heavens, then your opponent would have no chance to defeat you. In other words, the sword domain isn't truly invincible, because it can still be overcome if my opponent possesses heaven-defying strength, right? Asked Xianxia. How ignorant! She glanced coldly at him and said, there are no absolute techniques or domains in this world. The sword domain's strength depends entirely on you. If you exceed the heavens and the earth, then your opponent would still be unable to overcome your sword domain even if he possesses heaven-defying strength. Regardless of whether it's techniques or any other forces, their true strengths actually fully depend upon the user. Xianxia pondered deeply for a long time before he nodded and said, I understand. I should work hard on improving my strength and not entrusting my hopes onto the sword domain. Otherwise, even if I truly grasp it, it would still be useless if I'm not strong. At least you still have some merits. She glanced at him and spoke coldly. He glanced at her and couldn't be bothered to speak another word to her. He started to consider the price he'd paid to kill those half-saints from the fire spirit race. He'd set up a heaven-grade barrier to trap them just now, so he'd exhausted almost 5,000 extreme-grade energy stones. That really hurt. Fortunately, it was worth it, because not only did he obtain 10 half-saint sword servants, one of them was even a mid-grade half-saint. Besides that, he took all their possessions as well. There were 20,000 extreme-grade energy stones, over 31,000-year-old fire crystals, and quite a bit of other treasures. In total, those miscellaneous treasures were worth around 10 to 20,000 extreme-grade energy stones. It was a windfall. He gained both sword servants and wealth. Xianxia quickly found a secluded place and started to refine the sword servants. They were very important to him. After all, the defiant profounders were about to emerge and chaotic times were coming. At that time, only strength would be able to guarantee his survival. Moreover, he didn't just have to possess formidable strength, he had to possess powerful forces as well because he had many whom he wished to protect on Profounder Continent. The hallowed grounds could fall into chaos, but he couldn't allow profounder continent to fall into chaos as well. The sword spirit said solemnly, "You must attain the half-saint realm as soon as possible. I'm not even anxious. Why are you?" He glanced indifferently at her and then started to concentrate on refining the sword servants. "You should realize that both the defiant profounders and the hallowed grounds aren't your final enemy. Your true enemy is those fellows from the outer heavens. Do you think that you can fight them? I'm not trying to destroy your confidence, but just any expert from there would be sufficient to destroy the entire continent," said the sword spirit in an icy cold voice. "Would they dare to come down here?" Xianxia laughed with ridicule and said, "Countless people in this world, and even the defiant profounders, would be able to instantly attain the saint realm if they gained quintessence violet energy. At that time, I refuse to believe the outer heavens wouldn't fear a force of over 10,000 saint realm experts. Don't be a fool." She suddenly spoke angrily. "You really are ignorant. Do you know what the situation is like in the outer heavens? Do you really think the saint realm is that formidable? The defiant profounders were all at the saint realm all those years ago. Weren't they still sealed here in the end? Can't you talk nicely?" Xianxia was slightly displeased. The old sword spirit was much more amiable. "Amiable?" She grunted coldly and said, "You must be dreaming." Xianxia didn't waste another moment on her, and he placed all his concentration onto refining the sword servants. Just like that, a day passed, and Xianxia had another 10 half-saint sword servants. Coupled with the sword servants he already had, he had 21 half-saint sword servants now, and 2 of them were mid-grade half-saints. Such a force was simply capable of sweeping through a clan that had existed for 10,000 years. Puppets? Half-saint puppets? What a surprise! Suddenly, a voice resounded. Xianxia and the sword spirit's expressions changed. They turned around to look towards the source of the voice and saw a middle-aged man who wore a luxurious robe was standing not too far away on their right. "How long have you been standing there?" Xianxia stared fixedly at the middle-aged man. "Since you started refining those puppets." "I continued watching because I was curious. I never expected that an entire day would pass just like that," replied the middle-aged man. "An entire day." Both the sword spirit and Xianxia were astounded. The middle-aged man seemed to be around the age of 30. He wore a gray and loose robe, and his long hair hung loosely above his shoulder. He seemed to have a rather lazy appearance. Based on his outward appearance, there was nothing very special about the middle-aged man. Actually, he should be described as very ordinary, extremely ordinary. However, both the sword spirit and Xianxia acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. After all, he'd been standing near them for an entire day, but they hadn't noticed him at all. It was especially so for Xianxia. His expression was extremely solemn right now because the feeling of danger he sensed from the middle-aged man was something he'd only sensed from Elder Mu and Lu Yen. So, he was definitely not weaker than the 2 of them. "You're the hallowed lord of the hallowed halls?" Xianxia started to circulate his profound energy in secret while the 21 half-saints and Stone of Suppression were ready to be utilized at any moment. Meanwhile, the sword spirit's voice resounded within his mind. "Don't summon your sword servants. His strength far surpasses mid-grade half-saints, so it's pointless to use your sword servants against him. Acting according to the situation later." Xianxia's heart shook. He surpasses mid-grade half-saints. In other words, he might be a high-grade half-saint. He's dangerous. Extremely dangerous. Xianxia's face was unprecedentedly serious. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "They call me Supreme Exalt He. You should have heard of me." "Supreme Exalt He." Xianxia gasped. The hallowed halls had 3 supreme experts. The first was the mysterious hallowed lord, and the other 2 were the supreme exalts. He'd thought that the supreme exalts were mid-grade half-saints at most, just like the fire spirit race's patriarch. However, he'd never imagined that supreme exalt he would be in existence that surpassed mid-grade half-saints. Both the supreme exalts are ranked beneath the hallowed lord. So how formidable would the hallowed lord be? The middle-aged man's gaze suddenly descended upon the sword spirit, and he said, That sword is the key to sealing the Defiant Profounders. Even though she isn't needed to seal the Defiant Profounders anymore, she's still a huge threat to them. So, she must leave with me. The Sword Spirit's expression changed slightly because she hadn't expected that Supreme Exalt he had actually come for her. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man's gaze descended upon Yang Yi, and he said, I originally came for her alone. I never expected that I would encounter you. You're Yang Yi, right? I've heard of you. I never imagined that a genius like you could be born on Profounder Continent. Truly is quite a surprise. Since I've encountered you today, then come back to the hallowed halls with me as well. Why? Asked Yang Yi in a low voice while the profound energy within him was surging like a torrent. The middle-aged man smiled. It would truly be quite a waste to kill you. So, I've decided to change you and make you into a member of my hallowed halls. Of course, you might not be able to escape death if it's truly impossible to change you. After all, you've truly caused too much trouble. And there are many in the hallowed grounds who want to see you dead. Suppress him. Meanwhile, the Sword Spirit suddenly roared furiously. As soon as the Sword Spirit spoke, Yang Yi immediately activated the Stone of Suppression, and a mysterious force appeared here. The middle-aged man's brows knit together slightly. Meanwhile, the Sword Spirit formed a seal and chanted, Metal Sword, form. Wood Sword, form. Water Sword, form. Fire Sword, form. Earth Sword, form. As soon as she finished chanting, a small circular sword formation that was made from 5 different colors appeared beneath Yang Yi and her feet. 5-element sword flight. As soon as she finished speaking, their figures immediately vanished on the spot and appeared 5,000 kilometers away. 5-element sword flight? A smile arose on the corners of the middle-aged man's mouth. Quite interesting. He pointed his finger forward while he spoke. 5,000 kilometers away. Yang Yi and the Sword Spirit's figure had just appeared here when an enormous finger that could hold up the sky suddenly appeared behind them. The enormous finger contained terrifying force capable of destroying the world, and it hadn't even come into contact with them when the aura it emanated pressed down upon them like 100 mountains, causing them to feel suffocated. Yang Yi knew he couldn't resist this attack, nor could he avoid it. At the critical moment, Yang Yi waved his right hand, and a talisman appeared behind him and the Sword Spirit. The enormous finger struck it. Bang! The talisman trembled violently while Yang Yi, who stood behind the talisman, instantly spat out over 10 streams of blood essence. Yang Yi was shocked because it was a divine talisman, the divine talisman that Nether Maiden had got for them from that divine talisman master. He'd been reluctant to utilize it, but he had no other choice right now. According to Nether Maiden, that talisman was capable of resisting 50% of the strength of any attack. However, he was still heavily injured even after the talisman resisted 50% of that attack strength. Even if he was wearing the Herculean armor, he still felt like the bones throughout his entire body were on the verge of shattering. So, if he didn't have that divine talisman, then even if that attack couldn't kill him, it would have probably incapacitated him. Supreme Exalt, he was actually that terrifying. Flight! Meanwhile, the Sword Spirit hurriedly executed the 5-element sword flight technique again, and they vanished once more. As soon as they vanished, the talisman shattered into pieces, and then the space in an area of 3 kilometers around the talisman collapsed. A divine talisman? A trace of surprise flashed through the middle-aged man's eyes as he stood 5,000 kilometers away, and he said, I never expected that he would actually possess a divine talisman. I'm really quite surprised. As he spoke, he took a step forward, and it only took 2 breaths of time for him to arrive where Yang Yi and the Sword Spirit stood earlier. 5-element sword flight? Interesting indeed. The middle-aged man took another step forward. At this moment, Yang Yi and the Sword Spirit were fleeing madly. In less than 10 breaths of time, the Sword Spirit had executed the 5-element sword flight technique no less than 15 times. Even then, they could still sense that the middle-aged man was behind them, and that feeling they had was growing stronger. It was like he would appear in front of them at any moment. They didn't dare relax at all. So the Sword Spirit continuously executed her sword flight technique, while Yang Yi, was responsible for ceaselessly transferring profound energy to her. He's still following behind us. If this continues, then we'll be exhausted to death even if he doesn't kill us, said the sword spirit in a heavy voice while she continued to execute the 5-element sword flight technique. Why don't we return to profounder continent? Xianxia suggested. If they returned to profounder continent, then they would naturally have no need to fear the middle-aged man because Elder Mu and Lu Yen were there. Even though the middle-aged man was slightly overwhelmingly strong, he didn't think that the middle-aged man could fight both Elder Mu and Lu Yen. We won't make it, the sword spirit said. We've started slowing down while he's speeding up. So long as we stop, then it'll take half a breath of time at most for him to appear before us. Hey, you're a man. So quickly think of a way out of this situation. The sword spirit's voice carried a trace of anger as she finished speaking. Can you not be so fierce? Xianxia glanced at her with displeasure, because her temper was absolutely terrible when compared to the old sword spirit. If we're captured, then I'll lose my freedom, but I won't die. You, on the other hand, won't just lose your freedom. Just think about it, how many members of the hallowed grounds have you killed in the past? Would they let you live? So, quickly think of something if you don't want to die. If you really can't think of anything, then I'll have no choice but to use the only method I can think of, said the sword spirit. Xianxia hurriedly asked, You have a method? What is it? She replied coldly, Leave you here and flee alone. The corners of Xianxia's mouth twitched, and he gave her a thumbs up as he said, You really are the best. Actually, I have a way that I'm not certain of. Head towards the left. Go to Nameless City. At this moment, he'd thought of a person, Inin. He hadn't seen her fight, but he knew that the little girl was definitely an extremely terrifying existence. As for whether she could fight the middle-aged man, he didn't know the answer to that. In any case, he had no other choice, and he could only try it as a last resort. The sword spirit didn't hesitate at all when she heard him, and she immediately changed their direction and fled towards Nameless City. Unless she had no other choice, she didn't want to abandon Xianxia. After all, she needed an incessant supply of sword intent to improve her strength. Moreover, while she was immune to sword intent and sword energy, she couldn't ceaselessly produce sword intent like humans could. Just less than a breath of time after they vanished, the middle-aged man appeared where they had been, and he gazed towards the direction they were fleeing towards and frowned. The city of sin? He hesitated for an instant before he strode forward once more. Why are we heading to Nameless City? Asked the sword spirit. The sword spirit was unconscious when he was at Nameless City that day, so she didn't know anything about it. Or it should be said that she only possessed memories of what happened before he left the fire spirit race's territory, and she had no memories of what happened after that. To look for help, of course, said Xianxia. She glanced at him and said, I hope your help is strong enough. They vanished once more after she finished speaking. It didn't take long for them to arrive at Nameless City. They didn't fly straight into it but walked through the entrance instead. Because according to the sword spirit, there was a grand formation in the air above the city, and it was formidable to the point that even she couldn't get through it. They just arrived at Nameless City when a fat man obstructed their path. He held a pair of axes in his hands, and he glared fiercely at them and said, I own this path. If you want to enter the city, then leave some money. Fuck the hell off. How could Xianxia have any time to waste on the fatty? He casually swung his fist forward, and the powerful force it carried blasted the fatty flying. Meanwhile, their figures flashed and instantly vanished on the spot. At the same time, Xianxia led the way, and they raised their speed to its maximum as they shot towards the Tower of Buddha. Bastard! The fatty crawled up from the rubble created from the collision between him and the ground, and then he returned to the entrance of the city. However, he didn't even see a shadow flash by before a middle-aged man arrived at the entrance. The fatty thought the middle-aged man was a companion of the previous two people, and he immediately flared up. His figure flashed over to the middle-aged man while he swiftly swung his axes down, and he roared furiously, My fucking axes are thirsty for blood! However, the axes stopped just over 10 centimeters away from the middle-aged man's head. The middle-aged man glanced indifferently at the fatty, and then he took a step forward and vanished on the spot. Clang! The fatty's axes fell to the ground. At this moment, his face was covered in cold sweat, and his eyes were filled with extreme terror. He was at the 9th rank of the monarch realm, so he was absolutely no fool. Just that glance from the middle-aged man had caused his soul to tremble with fear. Moreover, the middle-aged man had vanished from his field of vision with just a single step. He knew very well that seemingly ordinary middle-aged man was much more terrifying than the young man who smashed him flying with a single punch. No, he felt that middle-aged man was even more terrifying than the boss of his boss. Damn it! I'm not doing this anymore. No more. The fatty didn't even pick up his axes. He immediately turned around and fled. Xianxia and the sword spirit arrived before the Tower of Buddha, and a middle-aged man appeared in front of them right when they arrived before its entrance. Xianxia's expression changed, and he hurriedly say, "Yin, I've brought food for you." "Really?" A voice that carried pleasant surprise resounded from within the tower. After that, Yin appeared before Xianxia and the sword spirit. She was able to see Yin because she wasn't a living being, and it was exactly the reason why a solemn expression appeared on her face. It was even to the extent that deep fear appeared in her eyes. Xianxia instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Yin, and then he hurriedly led the sword spirit over to Yin and said, "Yin, help Big Brother with something, all right?" As he spoke, he pointed at the middle-aged man and said, "That fellow has been chasing Big Brother for a very long time, and I can't fight him. Help me beat him up. All right?" Yin blinked, and then she gazed at the middle-aged man and said, "He can't see me." At this moment, the middle-aged man frowned, because as far as he was concerned, Xianxia was talking to the air. It didn't take long for the middle-aged man to swipe 2 of his fingers against his eyes. This time, he saw the little girl who stood by Xianxia's side. "He can see me now." Yin spoke again. The corners of Xianxia's mouth twitched fiercely. Obviously, the middle-aged man was that second type of person, one who possessed extremely formidable strength. The outer heavens! The middle-aged man gazed at Yin for a short while before he spoke these words. Yin gazed at him for a short while, and then she looked at Xianxia and said, "Big Brother, you can't push Yin into such a trap. He's so formidable. Yin might not be able to eat him." Xianxia raised a finger and said, 10,000 extreme-grade energy stones. "Yin, help me make him leave. All right?" Yin's eyes blinked swiftly, and there was even a trace of excitement in her eyes. However, it wasn't long before she shook her head and said, "He's very strong, and Yin has no hands. Yin will be bullied by him." Xianxia raised a second finger and said, "Yin, it's everything I have. If you're still unwilling to help me, then you can just eat me. Dying at your hands is better than being captured and tortured by him. Deal." A wisp of slyness flashed through her eyes. Xianxia's face twitched. "She isn't just a glutton. She's a trap." The middle-aged man spoke abruptly. "I'll give you 30,000 extreme-grade energy stones to let me take him." Xianxia's heart tightened as he gazed at Yin. The latter grinned and said, "Give me 30,000 and I'll let you leave, all right?" The middle-aged man said, "I'm not willing to fight you, but it doesn't mean that I'm afraid of you." As he spoke, he raised a finger and pointed it towards Yin. In an instant, the space before Yin was torn apart, and then an enormous finger shot out from within towards Yin. Xianxia and the sword spirit watched with astonishment as Yin suddenly opened her little mouth. However, at the instant she did that, an enormous mouth that was over 1 kilometer wide suddenly appeared in front of her, and it swallowed the enormous finger. The enormous mouth vanished once it swallowed the enormous finger, and Yin closed her mouth as well. After that, she greedily took a deep breath. Both Xianxia and the sword spirit's expressions changed drastically. Now, he finally knew how terrifying she was, because that same attack from the middle-aged man had almost instantly killed both him and the sword spirit just now. Yet now, she dealt with it with such ease. At this moment, Xianxia felt very fortunate. He felt very fortunate that he hadn't acted against her. Otherwise, he would have died before he even realized it. At the same time, He felt much better because it wasn't a humiliation to be robbed by her. I'm very angry now. Inin took 2 steps forward. However, it was exactly these 2 steps which made the entire city tremble, and it was like an earthquake had occurred. At this moment, countless people within the city were shocked, and all sorts of experts shot their gazes towards the Tower of Buddha. Inin opened her little mouth slightly. At the same time, an enormous mouth that blotted out the sky appeared in the air. The sky instantly darkened, and it seemed like even the heavens feared it. Inin took another light step with her right foot. Bang! The entire ground cracked apart while countless arm-thick cracks started spreading swiftly towards the surroundings. And it didn't even stop after reaching the ends of Xianxia and the sword spirit's vision. The enormous mouth in midair shot towards the middle-aged man. At this moment, the enormous mouth didn't feel like it intended to eat the middle-aged man. It seemed like it intended to eat the entire city. The middle-aged man had a solemn expression in his eyes while he watched it descend towards him, and then he raised his hands. Suddenly, he slapped both his palms upward, and 2 enormous palms formed from his energy and flashed up into the air. The energy palms were unlike any other energy palms Xianxia had seen in the past. They actually formed a circular shape as they shot up towards the enormous mouth, and the might they carried instantly multiplied by over 10 times. Bang! The enormous mouth and palms collided, and an explosion that shook the sky resounded through the city. Both attacks instantly shattered apart, and countless waves of energy swept towards the surroundings at a speed that wasn't visible to the eye. Everywhere they passed, space was instantly torn apart, and numerous huge spatial rifts appeared in the sky. Hell's finger! Suddenly, the middle-aged man's voice resounded once more, and then 10 enormous fingers appeared in front of Inin. The fingers didn't strike her. They trembled slightly instead before merging into one, and they formed a huge golden finger that was over 300 m long and over 10 m wide. The middle-aged man pointed lightly at Inin, and the golden finger instantly transformed into a ray of golden light that smashed down towards Inin. Tear! Inin's clear and melodious voice resounded, and then the space before her instantly warped. After that, it was like the space itself had been sliced apart by a sharp divine weapon, and it started to tear apart. Hiss! 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 The golden finger hadn't even arrived in front of her before it was torn into thousands of pieces along with the space in front of Inin. The middle-aged man didn't launch another attack, and he just gazed at Inin. Meanwhile, Inin didn't open her mouth. She just gazed at him as well. At this moment, the naive expression on her face and her smile had both vanished. There was only an icy cold expression and boundless killing intent. I must take them with me today. The middle-aged man took a step forward. Along with this action, Xianxia and the others noticed to their astonishment that the space within an area of a few hundred kilometers actually started trembling violently. At the same time, the spirit energy in an area of 500 kilometers was completely sucked away. Big brother, those rocks aren't enough. Can you give me more? Inin suddenly turned around to look at Xianxia and smiled sweetly. As many as you want. Xianxia spoke solemnly. However, I have to owe you for now, because I don't have that much. All right? She smiled again, and then she turned around to look at the middle-aged man. I'll eat you. As soon as she finished speaking, her face suddenly turned ferocious, and she opened her mouth. Heaven! Devourer! Bang! In an instant, the entire sky dimmed down. Xianxia and the others were astounded by this development. He raised his head and looked up into the sky, and he noticed that an enormous mouth that covered the sky had appeared in the air above the city. The mouth was extraordinarily huge, and both Xianxia and the sword spirit weren't able to lay eyes on its ends. Roar! The enormous mouth roared furiously, and then the entire city beneath it started trembling once more while countless buildings transformed into powder. All the experts within the city were horrified, and countless people started fleeing madly out of the city. Xianxia and the sword spirit watched this scene with shock. At this moment, Xianxia was beyond shocked. He hadn't imagined that Inin's strength was actually at such an extent. He suddenly recalled something Inin had said to him in the past. He'd asked her how strong she was, and she'd said that she could eat the entire city. He'd even thought that she was joking then. Yet now, the facts before his eyes told him that she wasn't joking at all. She could really eat the entire city. At this instant, Xianxia felt that his strength was still weak, and it wasn't just slightly weak. At the very least, he was absolutely no match for the middle-aged man or Inin. He'd thought that he was on the verge of coming into contact with the peak of this world. But when he witnessed their battle, he finally realized and understood that his strength was far from that. Not to mention the outer heavens, even this world had many existences who were far stronger than him. A savage expression flashed through the middle-aged man's eyes when he saw the enormous mouth, and he slowly stretched out his hands in opposite directions. Moreover, an extremely powerful fluctuation of energy was coming from his palms. As the fluctuation of energy appeared, the space around him started to surge. It was like an ocean that was being struck by a storm, and it was extremely horrifying. Cosmos, the middle-aged man's voice resounded. The battle won't continue, the sword spirit spoke solemnly. Xianxia nodded. Regardless of whether it was Inin or the middle-aged man, the destruction their strength could cause was sufficient to destroy the entire city, and when both of them fought, it was entirely capable of transforming the city into powder. However, there were many other formidable existences within the city. As expected, a blind old man appeared between Inin and the middle-aged man when they were about to completely destroy the city. "Little girl, that's enough. Otherwise, Nameless City will be destroyed," said the blind old man. "He bullied me," replied Inin. The blind old man shook his head slightly, and then he gazed at the middle-aged man and said, "Supreme Exalt He, I wonder if the agreement between your hallowed lord and our nameless city is still in effect? If it isn't, then leave something behind today. If it is, then leave. I'll consider the incident between you and Inin as a spar. They are wanted by my hallowed halls." The middle-aged man glanced at Xianxia and the sword spirit. "You shouldn't have let them enter Nameless City," said the blind old man. "They are of no use to you." The middle-aged man stared the old man in the eye. The old man shook his head and said, "Since she wants to protect them, then they are members of our city. Supreme Exalt He, please leave. If you intend to try and take them by force, then allow me to be frank. Your strength alone is insufficient." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "I understand. Don't worry. If I return, then trust me, you'll definitely be unable to stop me." As he spoke, he turned around, took a step forward, and vanished on the spot. Once the middle-aged man left, the city instantly calmed down once more, and Inin withdrew the enormous mouth that covered the sky. The old man suddenly gazed at Xianxia and said, "One night, both of you must leave Nameless City tomorrow. If you refuse, then I'll send you out myself." "Blind grandpa." Inin wanted to say something, but the old man just shook his head and said, "Little girl, I didn't make compromise with Supreme Exalt He because of you. Our city doesn't interfere in the matters outside the city. We can be considered to have broken the rules this time." The old man's figure flashed and vanished. Inin turned around and gazed at Xianxia before she said, "I'm sorry, both of you really have to leave, because we have an agreement with the hallowed grounds, and we can't interfere with anything outside the city. At the same time, they can't interfere in our city as well. But both of you don't belong to Nameless City. Moreover, it seems like a bunch of baddies are coming. So, Blind Grandpa and the others will absolutely not enter into conflict with the people from outside the city." Xianxia nodded and said, "I understand. Inin, thank you." As he spoke, he glanced at the surroundings and said, "Inin, can you take us somewhere quiet? I want to ask you some things." She blinked and then nodded. In the Tower of Buddha, Xianxia and the sword spirit had just walked into Inin's room when the sword spirit suddenly crashed to the ground. Xianxia was shocked, and he hurriedly supported her and said, "What's wrong? She has definitely exhausted too much of her strength." Inin spoke abruptly. Xianxia suddenly came to an understanding. He'd almost forgotten that the sword spirit had executed the 5-element sword flight technique for a few hundred times earlier. Even 2 half-saints couldn't endure such a crazy exhaustion of energy. I'll be fine with some rest. The sword spirit transformed back into the ancient sheath and sword precursor that hung on Xianxia's waist. Big brother, what did you want to ask me? Yinyin sat on the bed while she shook her legs slowly. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings, and he noticed that her room was very simple. There was nothing within it. There was only a single bed, and besides a tattered doll which sat on the bed, there wasn't anything else. Xianxia recalled what Nether Maiden had said about the people who came here from the outer heavens had sad pasts. Xianxia couldn't help but feel emotional. He didn't know what Yinyin had experienced, but he was clearly aware that it was definitely not something good. Xianxia walked over to her side and sat by her side. He gazed at her empty sleeves and said, "Yinyin, you should definitely be able to regrow your limbs with your current strength. Why haven't you restored your arms?" Yinin's face darkened when she heard this, and then she shook her head and said, "It's impossible." Yinin's arms were chopped off by a very, very, very strong person. An energy that surpasses the laws of this world remain there. So, it's impossible for me to grow new arms. Unless I have something with healing properties that surpasses the laws of this world. Otherwise, I can only restore them once I go back up there. But Yinin doesn't want to go back. Why? Xianxia was quite curious. Because the final goal of everyone, including the defiant profounders and hallowed grounds, was to return to the outer heavens. Because only there could they obtain quintessence violet energy, and only by obtaining quintessence violet energy could they break through and become true saints. Yinin lowered her head and pondered deeply for a short while. There are many bad people up there. Yinin's mother was killed by them, and they even chopped off Yinin's arms before throwing Yinin down into this world. They even called Yinin a bastard and said that Yinin's mother is shameless. But Yinin's mother is clearly a very good person. Why did they do that to mother? Why did they do that to Yinin? Why? Why? As she finished speaking, monstrous resentment and rage surged explosively from her. At the same time, the space around her actually cracked apart and seemed like it would shatter at any moment. Xianxia was astounded and hurriedly said, "Yinin, calm down, calm down. Don't act impulsively." Took quite a while for her to calm down once more. However, she didn't speak another word and just kept her head lowered. Xianxia sighed softly, sat closer to her, and then hesitated for a moment before he said, "Yinin, I might be able to restore your arms. However, you have to promise me that you can't tell anyone about it. All right?" Yinin raised her head and gazed at Xianxia for quite some time before she finally spoke. "Really?" Her voice carried a trace of uncertainty. Xianxia nodded and said, "But you can't tell anyone else. Otherwise, Big Brother will be pursued to his death." Yinin nodded forcefully. Xianxia took a deep breath, pressed his hands on her shoulders, and then violet profound energy within him that carried primordial violet energy slowly flowed into Yinin. What sort of energy was the primordial violet energy? He had no doubt that it definitely surpassed the laws of this world, could allow half-saints to become saints. So, as far as Xianxia was concerned, it was truly not difficult at all for it to restore Yinin's arms. Of course, he was taking a risk, because if Yinin aroused ill intent or betrayed him, then he would truly be finished. Xianxia knew that he was being quite impulsive, but he stopped hesitating when he saw how she was just now. Moreover, he had to repay her for helping him earlier. After all, she only had to agree and she could obtain 30,000 extreme-grade energy stones from the middle-aged man, but she chose to refuse it. That was the main reason why he decided to help her. At the moment the violet energy entered into her body, Yinin's eyes instantly opened wide, and her eyes were filled with shock, excitement, happiness, and so on and so forth. However, a powerful force suddenly surged out from her shoulders and shot towards Xianxia's hands. Xianxia's expression changed drastically. He didn't even have the chance to stop before he was blasted flying, and his figure smashed against the wall. Yinin's pupils constricted. She flashed over to Xianxia and said, "Big brother, it wasn't me. It wasn't me." She wanted to explain yet didn't know how to do so. In the end, she was so anxious that she started crying. Xianxia stood up after spitting out 2 mouthfuls of blood, and then he stretched out his hand and wiped off her tears. "Don't cry. I know it wasn't you." As he spoke, he gazed at her shoulders and said, "It was the remaining energy from that person who severed your arms." When he spoke up to this point, a very serious expression could be seen in Xianxia's eyes. After all, he was practically unable to resist just a strand of remaining energy. How strong are the people of the outer heavens? How do they compare to that old man I met in the primordial pagoda? Xianxia shook his head and then lowered his head to gaze at Yin. Meanwhile, Yin revealed a smile and said, "Thank you for believing me, big brother." Xianxia felt quite moved. He placed his hands onto her shoulders again and said, "It should be fine this time. I'll transfer that energy into your body, and you utilize it to restore your arms. All right?" She nodded. Xianxia transferred his profound energy into her again. As he sent his profound energy into her body, Yin's arms started to grow out slowly, and her face was covered with excitement. Around an hour passed before Xianxia withdrew his hands, and then he smiled. "All right, you can move them." At this moment, Yin's previously empty sleeves had arms within them. Yin gazed at her hands with excitement. They were very small and pure white. She was clearly not used to her new hands, and she started moving her fingers slowly as if she was terribly afraid of using too much force and breaking them. "I really have hands. I really do." Yin's tears flowed down incessantly as she gazed at her hands. However, her face was covered in a smile of wild joy. In the beginning, she started clapping her hands together lightly. In the end, she was swinging them incessantly while touching every single part of them. After a long moment of joy and excitement, Yin stopped, and then she walked over to Xianxia and embraced him as she said, "Big brother, that energy you gave Yin was quintessence violet energy, right?" Xianxia's figure stiffened. Did I make a bad bet? Right when this thought had just arisen within Xianxia's mind, Yin released him from her embrace and spoke in an extremely serious manner. "Big brother, you absolutely must not allow others to know that you possess quintessence violet energy. Otherwise, numerous old fellows in the city will eat you up. All of them are very formidable, especially blind grandpa and that freak without a head. Big brother, you're definitely unable to fight them right now." Xianxia instantly heaved a sigh of relief. "I was right to trust her." Xianxia smiled, and then he stretched out his hand to rub her head. "Big brother is naturally aware of that. That's why I asked you not to tell anyone. Otherwise, Big brother will definitely die." Yin spoke very solemnly. "Yin won't tell anymore." Xianxia nodded and said, "I trust you." As he spoke, he suddenly started sizing her up. Besides her newly grown arms that were pure white and clean, her face and neck were both covered in a layer of dirt. Especially her hair. It seemed like it hadn't been washed for months and was stuck together. Moreover, her clothes weren't just tattered. They were exceptionally dirty. In short, Yin seemed like a little beggar. "Yin, why don't you bathe?" asked Xianxia. "Bathe?" She blinked and said, "How?" Xianxia was speechless. Yin continued, "Big brother, teach me how, all right?" "Yin, you don't know how to bathe?" asked Xianxia. She shook her head in response. "No one taught Yin how." Xianxia suddenly asked, "Why do you eat people?" She replied as a matter of course, "Because I'm hungry." "You eat people because you're hungry?" Xianxia was quite stunned. "Then what should I eat?" she replied with a question. Xianxia was at a total loss for words. A short while passed before Xianxia struck himself on the forehead. Because he'd guessed correctly. Yin's actions were done entirely out of instinct. She was like a little wild beast. She ate when she was hungry and killed when she faced danger. The reason she was like that was entirely because no one had taught her what to do. Of course, no one dared to teach her as well. After all, her strength was truly too terrifying. Moreover, ordinary people weren't even able to see her, while those who could either feared her or were eaten by her. Xianxia rubbed her head and said, Yin, how old are you now?" She thought for a long time before she answered, I don't know. In any case, I've been here for many years. Yang Yi took Inin's hand and fell silent for a short while. Meanwhile, tempestuous waves of shock were surging through his heart, because Inin's age was actually similar to her outer appearance. She was around 10 years old at most, because her bones weren't more than 10 years old. She wasn't an old living fossil that had rejuvenated her youth. She was only 10 yet possessed such terrifying strength. Yang Yi took quite some time to suppress the shock within him, and then he asked, Inin, how are you so strong? Inin fell silent. Yang Yi smiled. It's fine if you don't want to tell me. After all, every single person had their own secrets, and so did he. So he understood it well. She suddenly raised her head and said, Grandpa Whitebeard said that I shouldn't tell any ordinary person. Big brother is just like mother, you're not an ordinary person. So, I can tell you, right? Yang Ye's eyelids twitched. Grandpa Whitebeard? Obviously, it was another heaven-defying figure. Inin said, Inin encountered Grandpa Whitebeard when I could just walk. He said that Inin possessed some sort of devourer physique that can devour all energy. Once it rises to a certain extent, it can even devour space, the world, and the cosmos. In short, it can devour all material energy. Even though Inin doesn't understand it, Inin can sense that it seemed to be quite powerful. It's capable of devouring space, the world, the cosmos, and all material energy. Yang Yi felt that even his hands were trembling slightly. Inin continued, Grandpa Whitebeard said he couldn't bear to kill me, and then he placed a cultivation technique called the Heaven Devourer technique within me and asked me to cultivate well. Besides that, he said he hoped that I would be able to encounter a technique or person that can restrain my physique. In the end, he rubbed my head and vanished. Yang Yi rubbed Inin's head again and said, That's a fortuitous encounter of yours, but why did those bad people kill your mother? And why did they do that to you? Yang Yi was still unable to figure it out, because whichever clan obtained a genius like Inin would definitely treat her like a god, and they would even sacrifice their entire clan to protect her. After all, so long as a genius like her was able to grow, she would be capable of bringing prosperity to the entire clan. Inin lowered her head and fell silent for quite some time. They said Inin is an illegitimate daughter, they said mother is shameless, and they said Inin is a monster that makes the cultivations of others regress. When she spoke up to this point, she suddenly looked up at Yang Yi and said with an aggrieved expression, But I didn't devour them, but they still killed mother and chopped off my hands. They intended to kill me as well. But Inin's aunt wanted Inin to live a life worse than death and threw Inin down here. As she finished speaking, her voice grew softer and softer while tears flowed ceaselessly down her face. Yang Yi sighed softly and spoke in a gentle tone. Don't think about all of that. Start over from today. He didn't urge her to take revenge because it might bring harm to her instead. Moreover, he didn't have the strength to help her as well. The only thing he could do now was to allow her to become more normal and happier. After he finished listening to her, Yang Yi firmed his resolve to become stronger without end. He was determined to become strong to the point that none could harm him. This was how the world was. If one had no strength, then one would be at the mercy of others. Principles, rules, laws, those were things used to restrict the weak. Yang Yi pinched Inin's cheek and said, Wait here for me. I'll be right back. She nodded and said, You must return. She had a slight and indescribable feeling of reliance towards Yang Yi. Yang Yi smiled, and then his figure vanished on the spot. Around 10 minutes passed before Yang Yi returned to Inin's room. A bath barrel appeared with a flip of his palm, and it was even filled with water. He gazed at her and said, Take off your clothes. Inin didn't hesitate to take everything off. Yang Yi naturally didn't have any other thoughts. He was no animal, and he took her to be like his sister, just like little Yao and Bower. Yang Yi carried her up and placed her into the bath barrel, and then he said, Wash yourself. It has to be completely clean. Understand? She nodded with seeming to be quite dazed, and then she started to get to work. Yang Yi took a glance out the window, and he noticed that dawn had almost arrived. Big brother, I'm done. Meanwhile, Yinyin suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi. Yang Yi glanced at her, and then he couldn't help but shake his head. "Let me do it!" Another 10 minutes passed before Yang Yi carried Yinyin out of the bath barrel, and then he took out the new clothes he'd bought. "Which one do you like?" She looked at them for a very long time before she pointed at a green dress. Yang Yi nodded and helped her get into it. After she'd cleaned herself up, Yinyin was like a perfectly sculpted doll. She seemed cute and lively, and it was obvious that she would grow up into a drop-dead gorgeous woman. Yang Yi withdrew a spatial ring and passed it to her. "I bought a huge amount of food for you and placed it in there. It should be enough for you to eat for a very long time. You're not allowed to eat people anymore. Understand?" She nodded in response. Yang Yi continued, "Besides food, there's a huge amount of clothes in there as well. In any case, I've bought you a lot of things. You can slowly look through them later. Remember to bathe every single day. You're not allowed to be dirty like before. All right?" She nodded again. Yang Yi was about to say something else when Yinyin suddenly raised her head, and she looked at him and said, "Big brother, you're leaving?" Yang Yi was slightly stunned, and then he nodded. She suddenly said, "Big brother, I'll go with you." Yang Yi shook his head. "Why?" Yinyin was quite sad. Yang Yi sighed softly and said, "You belong to Nameless City while you're here. So, even if that big bad fellow from before brings a huge number of experts here with him, he still wouldn't be able to do anything to you because the others here would help you. But if you leave with me, then you wouldn't belong to Nameless City anymore. Moreover, you'd even be swept into the enmity between me and the hallowed grounds. I would be dragging you down with me." He didn't doubt Yinin's strength. But if she lost the help of the others within the city, then she would absolutely be unable to fight the hallowed halls on her own. Yang Yi did want her to come with him. After all, she was very strong, and she would be a huge help to the Southern Territory. However, he couldn't act selfishly and drag her down with him. Moreover, he would definitely rely on her if he had her by his side, and that was very harmful to his own growth. Yang Yi rubbed her head and said, "Don't be sad. I'm not leaving forever. I'll come look for you once I've dealt with what I need to do. All right? You must return." She gazed very seriously at him and said, "Big brother, I'll go look for you if you don't come back. I promise." Yang Yi smiled, rubbed her head, and then vanished on the spot. She gazed at the direction Yang Yi left towards for a short while, and then she turned around and returned to her bed. She took off the red string with the spatial ring that Yang Yi gave her that day, and she placed the new spatial ring Yang Yi gave her with it. After that, she placed it back around her neck before she laid down on her bed, and a faint smile appeared on her face. The first glimmer of dawn still hadn't descended, yet Yang Yi had left the city. However, a person obstructed his path right after he left the city. It wasn't Supreme Exalt he but Nether Maiden. She gazed at him and said, "Should I call you Yang Yi or Yang Man? Haven't you known from the beginning?" Yang Yi stood on the spot and looked straight at her. He'd thought that it would be Supreme Exalt he who would be waiting here for him, or even another extraordinary expert of the hallowed halls. He'd never expected it to be Nether Maiden, and he really was quite surprised. She said, "I recognized you at first glance, because nothing in this world can deceive my eyes. Do you know why I didn't expose you and even helped you repeatedly? That's what I'm really curious about," replied Yang Yi. Nether Maiden said, "The profounder continent of the past was something that the hallowed grounds could destroy in an instant, but it's different now, because it has two figures that even my hallowed grounds has to treat with care. Coupled with the fact that the entire continent has been united, profounder continent can pose a certain level of threat to my hallowed grounds, especially when the defiant profounders are about to emerge from the seal." "You want me to lead profounder continent to side with the hallowed grounds?" asked Yang Yi. She shook her head and said, "I'm not that naive. I told you once before, if the people of this world want to live, then they must kill the defiant profounders. Unless they are killed, you and everyone on profounder continent will die. Of course, that includes my hallowed grounds as well. So long as the defiant profounders aren't killed, all of us will be buried with them. In my opinion, we should join forces against them, I don't know if the defiant profounders will be killed. What I do know is the hallowed grounds wanted me dead in the past, and it still wants me dead now, said Xianxia. She gazed at him for a short while and said, I'll give you one final chance. Agree to lead Profounder Continent to side with the hallowed grounds. Trust me, it's your last chance. Xianxia flipped his palm, and the Herculean hammer appeared in his right grasp. Moreover, the Mageforce shield appeared on his left hand. This is my answer, Nether Maiden. I'll leave him to you. A voice resounded from the horizon. Xianxia recognized that voice as Supreme Exalt He, but he was puzzled because Supreme Exalt He had left. Nether Maiden closed her eyes slowly and said, You've given up your last chance. The hallowed grounds doesn't want to be stabbed in the back by Profounder Continent while it's in battle with the defiant Profounders. So, the hallowed lord has torn open a spatial passageway to Profounder Continent. The Supreme Exalts, 10 mid-grade half-saints, and over 100 ordinary half-saints are on the way to Profounder Continent. They'll arrive in a day from now. You should be aware of the consequences. As soon as she finished speaking, 20 white-robed old men appeared by her side. They were half-saints, every single one of them, and there were even 3 mid-grade half-saints amongst them. At this moment, Xianxia's attention wasn't on those half-saints at all. Only what Nether Maiden said remained in his mind. The 2 Supreme Exalts and all those half-saints are heading for Profounder Continent. Would Lu Yen and Elder Mu be able to stop them? Nether Maiden suddenly said, I know you have half-saint puppets, so I brought these elders with me. They won't join the battle if you don't use your puppets. You intend to fight me in a one-on-one battle? Xianxia restrained his thoughts and gazed at her. She replied, I presume you definitely want to witness my true strength, right? It just so happens that I'm quite curious about your true strength as well. Why don't we satisfy each other's curiosity today? Xianxia gazed at her for a short while, and then he nodded. Then bring it on! Bring it on! Nether Maiden suddenly opened her eyes once she finished speaking. An array of white light and black light shot out from them. Bang! Bang! An enormous rift was torn open on the ground beneath Xianxia as his figure moved over 300 m back, and the Mageforce shield in his left hand cracked apart. Swoosh! Suddenly, the sound of the air being torn apart resounded. As soon as it resounded, a pitch-black chain smashed against Xianxia's Mageforce shield. Xianxia was pushed another 300 m back. This time, the Mageforce shield wasn't able to survive the impact, and it exploded apart into countless tiny pieces. Her Highness has become even stronger. One of the white-robed old men spoke in a deep voice. That shield was created from metals gathered from outer space. Even we wouldn't be able to blast it apart, yet she shattered it with such ease. Such strength really makes me feel embarrassed. Her Highness can't be judged by convention. Another white-robed old man gazed at Xianxia and said, Actually, I'm quite curious about him. His attainments in the Sword Dao are extraordinary, and his physical body has surpassed the half-saint realm. Moreover, according to rumors, he possesses first-level heaven-rank sword intent, and has even comprehended the sword domain. Even though he's an enemy of our hallowed grounds, I have to admit that besides Her Majesty, no one else in our hallowed grounds is a match for him. Not even the extraordinary geniuses of the Gu clan and Yuan clan. The old man continued, Just watch and see if the number 1 genius of this world is Her Majesty of that Sword Emperor. Big brother, good luck. A voice suddenly resounded. Xianxia looked over towards the source of the voice. He saw numerous figures were standing above Nameless City. Amongst them was the blind old man he met before, and Inin who'd just spoken was standing beside the blind old man. Inin smiled sweetly when she saw him looking over towards her, and then she waved at him. Xianxia smiled as well, and then he turned around to look at Nether Maiden. In the past, I usually instantly kill others of the same generation. It was truly too boring. Let's have a nice fight today. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia stomped the ground with his right foot. Bang! The ground collapsed while his figure relied on the counterforce to shoot off like a cannonball. Less than half a breath of time passed before he appeared above Nether Maiden, and the Herculean hammer carried the weight of mountains as it smashed down towards her. At the instant it descended, the force carried by the hammer caused the ground beneath Nether Maiden to sink down. Meanwhile, the chain that was wrapped around Nether Maiden started to move. They were like venomous snakes that were alarmed, and they instantly shot upward and struck against Xianxia's Herculean hammer. Clang! A sharp and ear-piercing explosion resounded. At the instant they collided, the Herculean hammer trembled violently as a strand of terrifying force came from the hammer and entered his right arm. Xianxia's expression instantly changed drastically because his right arm was trembling just like the Herculean hammer, and it was like it would explode apart at any moment. Xiangxia issued a command in his heart, and the Herculean armor covered his body. Only then did his arm and the hammer stop trembling. Clang! Meanwhile, the chain struck against the Herculean hammer again, and the powerful force of the strike blasted Xianxia flying. Moreover, the chain was like ghosts that refused to leave, and they tore through the air as they shot after Xianxia. The chain was extremely swift to the point they arrived in front of him before he could even recover from his shock. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly as he smashed the Herculean hammer against the chain again. Bang! Dazzling sparks sprayed from the point of collision, and the powerful force of the collision caused the space in the surroundings to split apart. Countless cracks formed in space like a spider web while the powerful force from the collision blasted Xianxia flying again. But it wasn't long before Xianxia descended to the ground. However, his feet had only just touched the ground when the chain appeared once more before him, and the force it carried was clearly much stronger than before. It tore through space and actually emanated enormous waves of energy that seemed like enormous dragons shooting towards the surroundings. Moreover, the waves of energy even caused the space in the surroundings to ripple. This time, Xianxia didn't swing the Herculean hammer with a single hand again. He took it in both hands instead while his left leg moved backwards slightly, and a trench appeared beneath his leg. Meanwhile, the profound energy within him surged like an ocean and transformed into a torrent that surged into his arms. Xianxia roared furiously as he swung the Herculean hammer down with both hands. Clang! An enormous explosion resounded as the ground beneath Xianxia collapsed, and the space at the point of collision shook violently. In an instant later, another explosion resounded before the space there shattered apart, and the black chain was blasted back. Meanwhile, Xianxia was blasted back again as well. Very strong. One of the spectating white-robed half-saints from the hallowed grounds spoke in a low voice. The other half-saints by his side nodded in agreement. He wasn't just speaking about Nether Maiden, he was speaking about Xianxia as well. Because that attack Xianxia executed was a huge threat even to them. However, they felt that Nether Maiden was much stronger than Xianxia. Not to mention anything else, it was obvious just from the string of collisions between Xianxia and Nether Maiden. Up until this point in the battle, Xianxia was constantly locked in a passive position and was ceaselessly resisting Nether Maiden's attacks. Whereas, Nether Maiden had crushed Xianxia's one and only attack with ease. Of course, they hadn't realized that Xianxia still hadn't drawn his sword until now. I fought Long Xian from the dragon race. He's the strongest genius in the younger generation of the dragon race, but his physical strength is still much more inferior to yours. You possess the strongest physical strength and physical defense I've ever seen. Nether Maiden walked slowly towards Xianxia and said, however, in my opinion, it's far from sufficient. Even if you're wearing the Herculean armor and holding the Herculean hammer. Xianxia's gaze descended onto her chain. She seemed to understand what he wanted. She stopped moving and continued, the nether chain, it's at the saint rank as well. But it's much better than yours. When she spoke up to this point, the nether chain on her suddenly started moving swiftly. I'm about to execute a saint rank technique. So, draw your sword. Xianxia exhaled and nodded. He put the Herculean hammer away, and then flipped his palm. Lunar Reverie appeared in his grasp. Xianxia grinned as he gazed at Lunar Reverie. It was a sword that Mu Qingfeng had lent to him, but he'd forgotten to return it. It had been damaged earlier, but it had the ability to restore itself, so it was fully restored now. Let's begin for real. As soon as he spoke these words, a strand of powerful sword intent surged out explosively from within him. Second-level heaven rank sword intent. Everyone here was astounded when they sensed the sword intent that surged out from Xianxia. because second-level heaven-rank sword intent could restrain and suppress half-saints. Of course, that wasn't the true cause of their shock. The true cause of their shock was that it had come from within a young man who was around the age of 20. If Her Highness didn't exist, then none of the myriad of geniuses in our hallowed grounds would be able to rival that kid. One of the white-robed old men spoke solemnly. The other old men fell silent, and it was exactly such silence that represented tacit approval. The blind old man who stood by Enin's side said, "An extraordinary genius in the sword Tao. Very good." Nether Maiden nodded slightly while she raised her hands up. In an instant, the chain around her shot into the sky before it spread throughout the sky like black lightning, causing the entire sky to suddenly become pitch black. At the same time, the terrifying energy contained within the chain caused the space in an area of 3 kilometers to tremble and surge. "Move back!" The expressions of those white-robed old men changed drastically, and they hastily tore space open and retreated around 10 kilometers away. "What a formidable little girl!" The blind old man who stood by Enin's side spoke once more, and his tone carried a trace of solemnness. "Xianxia, this is a saint-rank technique, chains of the heavens. Let me witness your true strength." As soon as she finished speaking, the enormous chain in midair enveloped down towards Xianxia like a huge net. The spectators noticed to their shock that the space within the chain net was actually being compressed into all sorts of strange shapes. Moreover, the space in its path was actually sliced apart in the shape of the net. So, numerous layers of overlapped space nets had appeared in the sky above Xianxia, as the chain net itself descended down towards him. Xianxia took a deep breath while he gazed at the enormous chain net, and a cold glow flashed through them. The sword intent within him surged out like a torrent and entered lunar reverie. It wasn't just his sword intent. The violet profound energy within him was surging madly into lunar reverie as well. At this moment, lunar reverie was trembling violently while sword howls shot into the sky. It seemed like it wanted to pierce a hole through the sky. In next to no time, lunar reverie seemed to be unable to endure Xianxia's sword intent and violet profound energy anymore, and it actually started to crack apart. "Come!" Xianxia's furious roar resounded through the sky as a sword howl reverberated through the world. Xianxia vanished alongside his sword, and then a ray of light shot towards the enormous net. Sword unification. And not just that. The speed and strength of his sword have actually multiplied in an instant. I can't resist such an attack. The faces of many of those half-saints from the hallowed halls had turned pale while such a thought appeared in their minds. Both Xianxia and Nether Maiden's attack speeds were extremely swift, and an ordinary person wouldn't be able to see their attacks clearly at all. However, practically everyone here was a half-saint, so they were able to witness the battle. They watched as the ray of light smashed against the enormous net. Bang! It was like divine lightning had exploded in the sky, and it could be clearly heard even more 500 kilometers away. At the point of collision, a wave of energy suddenly surged towards the surroundings. Everywhere it passed, space immediately collapsed while numerous pitch black and deep black holes appeared in the sky. However, those black holes were repaired in an instant, and the sky returned to calm once more. However, the enormous net hadn't dispersed, and neither had the ray of light. The enormous chain net was trembling violently while the ray of light was growing dimmer. "Break!" Xianxia's voice resounded once more, and the originally dim ray of light suddenly glowed brilliantly. Hiss! Xianxia shot through the enormous net along with his sword, and he moved at an extremely shocking speed, allowing him to arrive before Nether Maiden at the instant he broke through the net. However, Xianxia's pupils constricted violently because Nether Maiden clamped his sword with 2 fingers again. "Shatter!" As soon as she spoke, lunar reverie instantly transformed into ashes. Xianxia was astounded. He was just about to retreat, but Nether Maiden had appeared in front of him. She was so close that their faces could practically be said to be touching. Moreover, Nether Maiden's hand had suddenly pressed against Xianxia's chest. "Break!" As soon as she spoke, a terrifying force instantly swept through Xianxia's Herculean armor and smashed against his chest. However, right when he was about to be blasted flying, Xianxia had swiftly grabbed Nether Maiden's hand and then his second-level heaven-rank sword intent transformed into an intense sword that shot out from his hand and pierced through hers. A strand of blood sprayed into the air. Meanwhile, Xianxia's figure smashed against the walls of Nameless City, and it caused the entire city walls to shake. She's been injured. All the elders of the hallowed halls who were watching from afar felt astounded. They'd never imagined that Yang Yi would actually be able to injure her. At this moment, the shock in their hearts was simply impossible to describe with words. Nether Maiden had never suffered defeat in the hallowed halls, and she'd never been injured. Even if it was during a battle where she killed a half-saint, she still hadn't been injured. Yet now, she'd suffered an injury at the hands of a monarch realm profounder. Amazing! The blind old man spoke once more. Ini nodded while seeming to not fully understand what the old man meant. After that, she stared fixedly at Yang Yi, who'd stood up in front of the city walls. "It's the first time I've been injured in battle." Nether Maiden gazed at Yang Yi while she spoke, yet her voice carried no anger and only a trace of bewilderment. "I don't even know how long it has been. It's the first time I'm experiencing the feeling of being injured. Yang Yi, I truly admire you, and I really don't want to kill you. I've even worked hard towards that goal, but you still chose to become my enemy. It was you who chose to become my enemy." Yang Yi walked slowly towards her as he said, "Just like you, I don't want to become enemies with you as well. However, it can't be helped. Our standpoints are different, so we're bound to be enemies." She thought for a moment before she nodded. "You're right. Our standpoints are different. It isn't just that, the way we think is different as well. That predetermined that we would be enemies. Come, receive another move of mine." As she spoke, Nether Maiden raised her right hand slowly, and then she made a clawing motion towards Yang Yi from afar. "Reverse!" However, this action made the expressions of everyone here change drastically, and it even included the blind old man. Even though he couldn't see with his eyes, he could still see it. Reversal of yin and yang. How could this be possible? The blind old man's voice carried a trace of shock and slight fear as well. Just this clawing motion alone caused the space in an area of 300 m around Yang Yi to actually start warping and twisting like a pretzel. Moreover, the space in that area had turned dark like the night sky. Besides that, the experts in the surroundings with comparatively formidable strength noticed to their shock that the vitality within that area around Yang Yi was gone. It should be said that the vitality had been completely transformed into death energy. Reversal of yin and yang, overturning the world and destroying the laws. Who exactly is she? A headless person suddenly appeared by the side of the blind old man, and no one knew how the headless person had spoken. "The Nether Pavilion." The blind old man merely spoke these words, and then all of them fell completely silent. Yang Ye's face had turned grim when all of this happened, and it was extremely solemn as well, because he who resided within that area of space didn't just feel that both his soul and body were on the verge of being minced apart. He even felt the vitality within him being transformed into death energy at an alarming rate. At this moment, Yang Yi finally understood how terrifying Nether Maiden was, and he understood why even Elder Mu was fearful of her. Because at this moment, his sword intent was instantly shattered into bits upon leaving his body, and if it wasn't for the Herculean armor, even he would have probably become a corpse by now. Even then, he was still on the verge of becoming a corpse. No less than 10 breaths of time had passed before Yang Yi sensed that fine cracks were actually starting to appear on the Herculean armor. The gazes of everyone in the surroundings were on Yang Yi. Some carried pity, some took pleasure in his misfortune, some were indifferent. One had to die in a collision of two geniuses. At this moment, Yang Yi was dying slowly, and they would be witnessing the death of a peerless genius in the Sword Dao. In the opinion of many, this process was a very enjoyable one. Indeed, how could it not be enjoyable to watch a genius who could become a peerless expert die before their eyes? After all, it was a rare sight. Nether Maiden was watching Yang Yi as well. A wisp of a complicated expression flashed through her eyes as she watched the Herculean armor crack apart slowly. In the end, she slowly closed her eyes. "Big brother!" Inin suddenly cried out softly and intended to lend Yang Yi a hand. However, she was stopped by the headless person. Ineen was furious, and boundless killing intent even surged into her eyes. This caused the eyelids of the blind old man to twitch, and he even instinctively moved aside. Meanwhile, a voice suddenly resounded from the headless person's stomach. "Don't be in a hurry to help. Look, the shock he had on his face is gone. He probably has a way to deal with it. He's a sword cultivator, so he'll suffer from inner demons if you lend him a hand now. Thus, even if you save him, he'll be crippled, because he might not be able to overcome his inner demons forever. Little girl, he's right." Meanwhile, the blind old man spoke as well. "That little girl who's fighting him is at a lower realm of cultivation, so it's a fair fight between them. His mental state will definitely suffer if you lend him a hand now, and that would cause his sword heart to lose its clarity. That's a lethal blow to any sword cultivator. So, just watch." Even though anxiousness still remained in Ineen's eyes, she didn't act hastily, and she just stared fixedly at Xianxia. The cracks on the Herculean armor were growing larger and larger, and the armor itself was losing its shape. Suddenly, the sword spirit's anxious voice resounded in Xianxia's mind. "Quickly activate the sword domain and follow my instructions. Clear your mind and focus. Everything within the sword domain is you, and you are everything within the sword domain. You're invincible within the sword domain." As her voice resounded in Xianxia's mind, Xianxia slowly closed his eyes. This time, he didn't try to control the sword domain, he started to sense everything within it instead. The first thing he sensed was Nether Maiden's laws. It was very powerful, extremely powerful. It was powerful to the point that even his sword intent couldn't harm it. The energy of her laws had forcefully changed everything around him. For example, the sky, the scorching sun above the sky, and everything around him were pitch black like the veil of night. Moreover, his body was clearly filled with boundless vitality, but it was gradually being transformed into death energy now. It was the reversal of yin and yang. It was a type of energy of the laws, and it has surpassed the scope of techniques. Xianxia's vision gradually grew clearer. He used to see everything around him with his eyes, yet now he was using his heart to view it, and such observation through the eye of his heart allowed him to notice some things that he'd never come into contact with in the past. It was the quintessence of all things, the quintessence of energy and the quintessence of the laws. Of course, he'd only noticed it yet hadn't grasped it. Moreover, he understood that he'd merely noticed the tip of the iceberg. At this moment, Xianxia understood why the sword sect's founding ancestor's sword intent was that powerful. It was because it contained the energy of the laws possessed by the unfettered one. To put it simply, it couldn't be considered as mere sword intent, it should be considered as sword intent of the laws. What were the laws? Xianxia didn't know the answer to that, because he hadn't grasped them. But he understood what the quintessence of things were. He could clearly sense all sorts of energy including space and time within the scope of his sword domain. All of them seemed like they'd been magnified 10,000 times within his mind, and every minute detail was clearly visible to him. After he grasped the quintessence of these things, it couldn't be any easier to break them open and destroy them. Now, he finally understood why his sword domain wasn't strong in the past. It was because he hadn't understood the true meaning of the sword domain, and he was just utilizing it instinctively to suppress his enemies. That was exactly why his sword domain had been shattered with a single strike from Nether Maiden that day. Xianxia's eyes slowly opened up, and then sword intent surged out from within him. This time, the sword intent wasn't shattered by the energy of Nether Maiden's laws. The sword intent seemed to be one with the space and air around Xianxia. It could be seen and sensed, yet it left no traces behind. The sword intent formed a ball that started enlarging with Xianxia at the center. Everywhere it passed, space turned from black to white while death energy was converted into vitality. It wasn't long before everything within Xianxia's sword domain had returned to calm. Moreover, his sword intent filled his sword domain, and the sword intent had merged completely with the heavens and the earth. Even space had merged with it. Everyone in the surroundings was petrified. The impregnable sword domain. A long time passed before the blind old man spoke. Another sword sect's founding ancestor has been born. The headless person spoke as well. At this moment, Nether Maiden opened her eyes, and she gazed at Yang Yi for a long time before she said, "Congratulations. No one at the mid-grade half-saint realm or below can kill you now." Yang Yi glanced at Nether Maiden, and then his figure flashed and transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the horizon. "Your Highness, he'll definitely become a formidable enemy to our hallowed halls if he isn't killed." Those white-robed elders of the hallowed halls appeared by Nether Maiden's side while one of them spoke solemnly. Nether Maiden looked towards the horizon for a short while, and then she withdrew her gaze and glanced at the old man. "You want me to die with him?" The old man's expression changed, and then he hurriedly said, "I dare not ask that." Nether Maiden paid no further attention to the old man. She turned around and transformed into a ray of light that vanished from their fields of vision. The old man's face changed indeterminately, and he seemed as if he wanted to pursue Yang Yi. However, one of the old men by his side said, "While he has grasped some of the ability of the sword domain, he's far inferior to the sword sect's founding ancestor. The Supreme Exalts are on their way to the Southern Territory, so he'll only be giving his life away by returning there. But if we pursue him now, even if we're able to kill the half-saint puppets he has and kill him as well, it would be a Pyrrhic victory for us. It isn't worth it." The old man hesitated for a long time upon hearing this. In the end, he abandoned his intentions to pursue Yang Yi and returned to the hallowed halls with the others. Meanwhile, the blind old man gazed towards the direction Yang Yi had left and said, "He's both righteous and evil. He kills the members of the hallowed grounds, yet kills the defiant profounders as well. If he leads the Southern Territory to attack us while we fight the defiant profounders in the future, then it probably won't end well for us. He's only 5,000 kilometers away right now. I'm 90% confident in my ability to kill him if I act now. I'll definitely eat you." In gazed at the old man and spoke seriously, "Even though Big Brother doesn't allow me to eat people, I'll break the rules once if you dare to kill him." The corners of the old man's mouth twitched, and he said, "How cruel of you, little girl. How long have we known each other? How long have you known him? Yet you actually intend to eat me for him? I really doted on you for nothing." In grunted and remained silent. Meanwhile, the headless person spoke abruptly. "Only if the three of us stay together would we be able to resist the hallowed grounds and defiant profounders. If we fight each other, then it would be no different than courting death. Just leave that kid, Yang Yi, alive. It's just as you said earlier. He fights the defiant profounders as well. Perhaps he might become an ally of ours in the future. There's a very high probability for that, because it's obvious that he has been very good to In. Of course." In took her chain in her hand while pride covered her face. "You've been bewitched by him." The blind old man shook his head and vanished on the spot. "Let's return and cultivate in preparation for the war that'll start 2 months from now." The headless person vanished as well. Yang Yi stood there and gazed off in the direction Yang Yi left towards for a long time, and then she finally went back into the city. Yang Ye's figure shot swiftly towards profounder continent. While he was confident in Elder Mu and Lu Yen, the experts that were coming from the hallowed grounds were no weaklings. Moreover, based on what Nether Maiden said, the Hallowed Lord seemed to have acted as well. So he had to rush back no matter what. "She had the chance to kill you earlier." Suddenly, the sword spirit's voice resounded in his mind. "What makes you think that?" Yang Yi didn't really believe her, because he really felt like he was the god of the area within his sword domain. She asked, "Do you think that you've really grasped the sword domain?" "Have I not?" Yang Yi frowned. "You're still very far from that." She continued, "The sword domain is like a world. Do you know what a world is made of? It's made of the spatial laws, temporal laws, life laws, karma laws, rebirth laws. In short, a world is made from countless laws and countless types of materials. All of them together is what others call the Tao. Do you know why the sword sect's founding ancestor was that strong? It was because he'd grasped his own Tao. He had countless laws to support him within his sword domain, but what about you? You haven't even grasped a single law, so how strong can your sword domain be?" Yang Yi opened his mouth but was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, the sword spirit continued, The reason I said she could kill you was that she'd grasped a trace of the energy of the laws. You should be aware that there's no absolute invincibility in this world. Just like your sword domain, if the energy of the laws she possessed was slightly stronger, then she would still be completely capable of crushing your sword domain. Just like the sword sect's founding ancestor, his strength had far surpassed the limits of this world. So he could even pierce a hole through the heavens. But is your sword domain stronger than this world? Xianxia remained silent for a long time before he said, I understand what you mean. The strength of the sword domain depends entirely upon me. If I'm strong, then it would be strong. But if I'm weak, then it would be weak as well. She remained silent for a long time before she spoke again. At least you're not completely beyond saving. You haven't become lost in your newfound strength. Xianxia laughed bitterly and said, If you didn't warn me, then I might have really gotten lost in it. You know, I actually had the impulse to fight Supreme Exalt He in a one-on-one battle. Then you would be giving your life away. She said, That fellow's strength has practically arrived at the peak of this world. So you wouldn't be a match for him even if you attain the half-saint realm. I'm still quite weak in the end. Xianxia shook his head and stopped lingering on this. After all, it wasn't something he could rush. Right, you said Nether Maiden could have killed me? Why? Didn't you realize that she hasn't used her full strength? The sword spirit said, Of course. She should have been clearly aware that unless she tries to take you down with her, it would be impossible to kill you while you have the sword domain. In short, if you go against her in the future, then you have to be careful. Besides that, remember not to use the sword domain again. Why? Xianxia was puzzled. The sword spirit suddenly said, Do you know how long more you can live for? At least a few hundred years. Xianxia spoke frankly. After all, he'd attained the monarch realm, so he should have a few hundred years of additional lifespan. Sense it yourself and see, said the sword spirit. Xianxia hesitated for a moment when he heard this, and then he started to check through his body. A moment passed before astonishment filled his eyes, because he noticed that his remaining lifespan could last for a month at most. What's going on? Xianxia spoke with shock. Is it because of Nether Maiden? No. The sword spirit continued. This is why I didn't tell you how to utilize the sword domain. Because if you are to utilize it now, then you'll have to pay a price, and you might not be able to afford paying such a price. Why has this happened? Xianxia spoke in a low voice. Earlier, your sword domain contained the energy of two laws, the temporal laws and spatial laws. However, you haven't grasped any one of them. So, it was like a person rashly activating a profound technique without fully grasping it, and that person would definitely suffer backlash as a consequence. You suffered backlash from utilizing the sword domain. Understand? Said the sword spirit. Isn't this backlash a little too terrifying? A month. Xianxia had an utterly bitter expression on his face, because if he didn't think of a way to increase his lifespan or advance in his cultivation within this month of time, then only death would be awaiting him. It didn't take long for Xianxia to arrive at the teleportation formation which led to Profounder Continent. To Xianxia's surprise, there was no one guarding the formation. He didn't have the mood to think about why it was like that, and he just flashed into it.